Hello, everyone. Very excited to have you all in this platform again. So, we all are here today to discuss how to scale AI responsibly. To get more insights, I would hand it over to Hasit to take it over. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Monica, and welcome both of Manish. I think Manish Bhide from IBM, who is the head of Responsible AI Space and CTO for IBM, and we have Manish Jain, who is the head of Enterprise AI Architect for Tech Mahindra. Myself, Hasit, I'm CTO and Global Head of AI for Tech Mahindra, and we have Monica here. So I think it's an interesting topic, and that reminds me one of my conversation with one of my friend on Duckworth-Lewis rule of cricket, correct? And we are discussing that that is unfair rule that whoever bets, whoever loses because of Duckworth-Lewis, it blames Duckworth-Lewis game. So I was just thinking whether it's a fair issue or it's something else, because this topic is also has a fairness element, and I realized that it's probably not a fairness issue, because irrespective of which team gets applied to, both the rule is applied common to both of them, correct? So as long as the rule is applied to both of them, it may not be the fairness issue. And that's where the nuances of fairness, knowing what is fair and what is not fair, becomes very fundamental principle of responsible AI. Same goes for the explainability aspect also, and many other aspects which we'll be touching upon. Do we need explainability for everything? Some of these things we'll be talking. It's a very, very important area. So I'll start with Manish Bhide to talk about some of the things. And my first question to Manish is it a responsible AI hype, or it's a reality, or it will potentially reduce the speed of adoption of AI in enterprise? What's your view, Manish?
So this is actually a very good question, Hasit. I firmly believe that this is not a hype, and this is a reality that enterprises need to accept. And there are multiple reasons for that. The first, I'll give you some examples of how enterprises who have not looked into trusted AI, what are the outcomes that they faced. So recently there have been a slew of news reports on, some of them were like a bank was fined $175 million because they were not being fair. I mean, they were charging more fees from their minority customers. There was an AI model behind it, which was acting in a biased manner. That's one example. Another example, which was very publicly discussed, was a credit card company. What they had done was they were giving less credit to their women applicants. And again, that also led to a lot of repercussions. So what happens is that if enterprises are in a regulated space, like banking, like utility companies, there are specific regulations. So for example, in the banking in the US, there is SR 11-7, which mandates the kind of tests that any enterprise needs to do before a model is deployed into production. And if somehow it is proved that enterprises are not adhering to these kind of rules, then they end up paying so much fines, right? And that's I mean, this problem is not limited to regulated industries. Because if you think about it, if there is any company and such kind of news articles come out, that can be a marketing disaster, which is a very steep price to pay for enterprises. So it is very critical that enterprises take this very seriously, irrespective of whether they are in a regulated or non-regulated space. So that answers the first part of your question. The second part is actually very important, which is that does it stifle the rate of adoption of AI? And I'll give you an actual example. I was talking to the chief data scientist of one of the biggest banks in Europe. And that person told me that his team had built an AI model, and they were trying to convince the line of business owner to deploy it into production. And the line of business owner had heard about all these stories of bias, and he was worried what it will lead to. And they spent, you will not believe it, they spent 3 hours with that line of business owner trying to convince him that the model should be deployed, and the line of business owner did not agree. So this was the state of affairs 3 years ago. Thankfully, what has happened now is that the industry has adopted. There are lots of products, lots of technologies available. Companies like Tech Mahindra are doing work in this space. Products from IBM are there in the space, like OpenScale, and we have an offering for AI governance, which address these kind of fears of line of business owners and help them gain confidence that the AI model is not going to be biased. And with that, they can, I recently published a blog where I said that you can have the AI cake and eat it too. So you can not only deploy AI at scale, but you can do it in a trusted manner.
Thanks. I think it's a good insight. Manish Jain, for you, what do you want to add? Anything on top of it? What is your view on this?
Yeah, I totally concur with Manish, and I firmly feel that being responsible is going to help business, not in terms of their public image or compliance, but also in terms of customer experience and customer satisfaction, right? When customer knows they are being treated fairly, they also understand the decisions which are taken by models, they start being more loyal to that company, and they start believing that the company cares for me. At the same time, I also believe that being more responsible is in fact going to help in overall adoption, right? It's not going to stop the adoption. What we have seen in many organizations, that in spite of having ML models, the results are not fully utilized by business because they are not confident on the results. So with having these responsible AI techniques, the business confidence can be increased. They will start understanding model better. They will also, have visibility on any bias or fairness challenges. And that way, the adoption is going to increase. When business understands it, they can also make sure the consumers also understand the output. And overall, this is going to actually increase in the surge of ML adoption.
Great. I think that gives us the confidence, yes, that it's not going to stifle the growth and adoption of the AI. I think that's a good confidence both of you are giving to us. Next, Manish, I think whenever I have a habit of seeing the weather report whenever I go travel somewhere, correct? And I just blindly trust that piece, correct? I don't ask for the explainability why something is being told, correct? So do. And I don't think anybody in the world really try to ask the explanation why you are telling that there will be a storm and the temperature drop will happen or temperature up will happen. We just take it kind of thing. Right? So does everything really need the explainability? What is the trade-off? Because you can't answering every question somebody asks, and most of the time people may not ask the thing, correct? So how do we draw the trade-off of what to be explained and what not to be explained?
So we need to look at the explainability from different angles. So if a company is operating in a regulated space, if they are using AI for production use cases, they absolutely need explainability. As Manish Jain mentioned, explainability and trust help people understand that the model is making the right decision. It helps build them confidence in it. So if you are in a regulated space, if you are deploying models in production, there is absolutely no two ways about it that explainability is a must have. Now, you touched upon an interesting angle, which is, as an end user, do you really care about explainability? And the answer is yes and no. It depends on what space you are operating in. So I'll give you an interesting example from that I came across while working with one of my clients. They had an AI model which was deciding who are the set of people who should be called in for an interview. Typical HR case, right? Shortlisting of resumes. And they were being given the top 10 candidates by that AI model. But what was happening was they were not told why these why these are the top 10 candidates. And then what ended up happening was that the hiring manager was going and interviewing people beyond the 10 because they did not trust that model. Right now, they started using OpenScale, and they not only told that these are the 10, but these are the reasons why this person is in the top 10. When that happened, they stopped interviewing beyond the 10, and it helped the enterprise. So in some cases, consumers of AI also need to understand why an AI model is making a specific decision based on explainability. But if you look at the other examples that you talked about, the weather, I mean, this whole debate about whether explainability is necessary started off when some researchers in the US said that Especially in the medical domain, physicians don't really care about explanations. But the point is that although in some cases the end users might not care about explanations, but there might be other, so data scientists would care about that. So there is a classic example of AI model, classification model deciding whether an image is of a husky or it's of a wolf, right? So, and let's say that the model is doing fantastic on your test data, but on production it started doing bad. Now, just making an argument that, look, the model is giving me accurate results, that's why I don't care about explainability, is not the right thing to do, because the model could have learned that whenever there is snow in the background, it's a wolf, because in all your training data, the wolf images had snow in the background, and what the model ended up learning is that whenever there is snow, it's that of a wolf. So the point is that even if end users don't care about explainability, data scientists will care about explainability. So there is no escaping that per se. In some cases, end user might not care, but that's not the complete story. The complete story, if you look at it from all angles, explainability does play a role. In some cases, it will be across the spectrum. In some cases, it might be just for data scientists.
Manish, do you want to add something on this?
Absolutely. And, I would add a practical consumer example. So I was going for an auto insurance quote to a new service provider, and they gave me a very high quote, right? I really wanted to understand from them what are the reasons behind this high quote. And they could not explain me the details. And as a customer, what I did is I actually went to other provider and got a different quote, right? So this was a classic scenario, why explainability is important for consumers. I really wanted to know what are the factors which are calculating my high premium, but they could not provide me enough details. Now, if they had given me details, probably I could have stayed, I could have worked on some of those factors and tried to make my premium better, right? So this is one side. Now, other side is, as an organization, you may want to communicate the factors, but you need to be careful as well. For example, for the premium example, right? You can tell me that there are 5 factors which are impacting the premium, but as soon as you start giving the weightage of each factor, right? That's where the security challenges starts coming in. As an adversary, I could actually look at those and try to take advantage from the model. So we probably need to find a balance, how much we explain to our consumers and what kind of information we divulge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think it's a very important point. I think that reminds me of my experience also with one of the bank when I was going for housing loan. I was given some credit score and a certain rate of loan, correct? Then I started asking, can I get some lesser kind of thing? They said that this is what your credit score is, so you can't get cheaper than that. So I said, how does the score has been calculated? Correct? Nobody knew how this gets calculated. So I think despite sometimes I feel that it's unfair on AI that only for AI fairness has been asked. This credit scoring system in banks are all rule-based thing. Correct? There's nothing AI on that. Most of the thing now people are enhancing to AI-led, but traditional credit score is a very rule-based kind of thing, and even those are not explainable to the consumer and consumer. So now nobody asks those questions to those techniques, but suddenly for AI has to go through this questioning. So, but yeah, I think there are practical nuances. Ideally, if we can have it everywhere, it's great. I think it's always desirable. But yeah, I think what you said is also correct. Now, coming back to Manish, to you, I think you are a technologist who are creating technology in IBM on solving this problem, correct? And IBM OpenScale is one of the leading product, probably ahead in the curve, correct, when compared to other competitors. Just want to understand, is the technology ready to address all of these concerns? Because while we are talking about the fairness, explained, there are many other aspects, reproducibility, and many other things are there, correct? So is the technology ready for each of these things?
So the answer is overwhelmingly yes. I work with a lot of clients, and I have clients who are leveraging my products like OpenScale and AI governance, and they are able to scale the adoption of their AI models significantly. Now, one thing that we need to understand is that when we talk about scale, that can mean different things. So, I mean, just to give you an example, when we say that this is a very fast car, versus this is a very fast fighter jet. These are two different scales altogether, right? Now, when we say scale the deployment of AI, we cannot compare it to deployment of any other code where you just click a button, you have built the code, you click a button, and in seconds it gets deployed into production. When it comes to AI, there are different things that an enterprise cares about. There are different kinds of validation that they need to do, which takes a bit of time. But the point is, I mean, if I go back to my previous example, where the chief data scientist of one of the biggest European banks said that they spent 3 hours trying to convince the line of business owner, and still he was not convinced, right? That's one end of the spectrum of how things were, which was delaying the adoption of AI. And there are other nuances as well. I'll give you another example from a client. This is a client from the financial space. What happens typically in financial institutions is that they have a model risk management team who are responsible for validating a model. Now, the model risk management team will look into the model, and if it's a deep learning model, they'll say, and they'll go and ask the data scientist, hey, did you try a simpler model? Why did you use a deep learning model, right? And what happens is that the data scientist would have worked on it, let's say a month back. They have to go and dig up their notes and figure out, hey, why did I really try a decision tree based model or some simpler model? And then figure out, hey, the performance was not great or the fairness was not great, and that's why we didn't do it. And this back and forth is what leads to wasting a lot of time for the model risk management team to give an approval that this model is good enough to be deployed into production. So in order to address these kind of challenges, we have an AI governance offering that governs the end-to-end life cycle, right from why the model is being built, who built it, who validated it, who deployed it, and it puts in the right guardrails when the model is deployed in production, so that people are confident that even after it's deployed into production, it's not going to start acting in a biased manner. So the point is that with the kind of technology that exists in the market, enterprises can scale their adoption of AI without worrying about all of these things and really help get onto the AI, start adopting a lot of AI models in their enterprise and get a competitive advantage.
That's very informative, and I think good that technology is ready. I think typically technology lags with the aspiration of the enterprises. Here is the case where the technology is almost ready to meet the aspirations. Manish, and to you, I think sometimes it worries me that everywhere there is a camera, and all the camera is becoming intelligent, correct? And I don't know what insights people keep generating out of it without my knowledge, correct? And the edge AI is a culprit for that, correct? So how do we ensure that this data protections and data privacy aspects are addressed while deploying and using any of these technologies? These are very powerful technology, correct? It's extremely disruptive, what you can do, and the extreme personalization, extreme detailed insight, you can get it using computer vision, edge AI combination. And if you build the IoT around that thing, it can have a lot of industrial usage. So how this is taken care?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. While these technologies are really powerful, they do collect a lot of personal information and private data. And not only the edge AI models, in fact, the device is running with you all the time, be it at your home or your cell phone or anything. So that actually puts any organization into a spot where they have to ensure the security of data they collect in terms of availability, confidentiality, integrity, all those aspects. And from the time of collection to data movement to processing to training of models, and then model maintenance and model uses in the overall life cycle of machine learning, they have to ensure that they are adhering to all the compliances as it go along, right? So one specific point I would like to touch, which is regarding the models which actually collect this data and do the training. There are few techniques, which we can apply to ensure this data privacy. One of them is differential privacy, where you can actually add some random noise and anonymize the private data and utilize that for training. That way, any adversary may not be able to, or it would be difficult for the adversary to actually get back data from your trained model. Since these models are at the edge, they are actually at a risk of adversaries. A lot of time they try to decode the model back and try to understand the training data. So differential privacy is one aspect which could help. Along with that, there are some encryption methodologies like homomorphic encryption, which we can leverage and still, do the training without actually working with real data. Similarly, there is another concept which is coming up called federated learning, where we do not move the data to a centralized location. Basically, all the devices or all the units in system work together in unison to train a model, and finally, a trained model goes to all the devices. So these are some of the techniques which we can apply specific to model training with private data, and we can ensure that this, along with other data protection methodology, which we generally utilize in organization, these two together can definitely mitigate some of the data risks which we might have with private data.
Okay. This is a good amount of learning for me from this response. Thanks for that. Manish, over to you again. So the enterprise are still enterprise AI adoption is still lower, correct? Although it's been 2 years since enterprise have started journey on AI and various scale, correct, on various things, but it's still very minuscule when it comes to the possibilities of AI in enterprises, correct? So possibility versus what they have is a huge gap right now. But if responsibility is a very important aspect to scale AI, is it a prescription to the enterprise? How do they go about it? Where do they start? And what kind of solution infrastructure, what kind of policy, what kind of structure they should put in place? Is it a prescription, or it is very specific to every company and they have to figure it out their own?
So each company can have their nuances, but based on my experience working with clients, I have typically seen that enterprises fall into one of two categories. One is that there is an enterprise-wide mandate that the company needs to make sure that their AI is responsible. And when that comes from an enterprise level, they make sure that they are doing monitoring the AI models throughout the life cycle. There are other set of companies who try to prefer to start small, where they will just look at one stage of the life cycle. It could be that they are looking at the model that is deployed in production to make sure that they have the right guardrails in place and the model doesn't go beyond specific fairness values or quality, or it doesn't drift, and so on and so forth, right? And once they see the value, once the different stakeholders in the enterprise see the value, then I have seen that then they realize the true value of AI and trusted AI, and then they try to expand throughout the life cycle, right? But I mean, if things are to be have an enterprise-wide adoption, it is critical that the right stakeholders sign up and understand the value of trusted AI. Because in a typical enterprise, there are different sets of people who play a role in the AI model lifecycle. So there is model owners who are line of business. There will be data scientists who will be responsible for building the model. There will be model validators in financial domain. They will report into the chief risk officer. Then there will be model ops people who will be responsible for monitoring the model. So you need to make sure that all this entire life cycle is on board. And once that happens, I've seen that people really see the true value that trusted AI brings. And not just that, they see the true value of AI, because then the adoption of AI explodes within the company. So if, I mean, it's a no-brainer today, right? That if enterprises want to be successful, they have to adopt AI. But in order to build trusted AI, it's not an easy problem to solve, because there are a lot of things that you need to do. I mean, there is a process angle, there is a people angle, but there is a technology angle as well, right? So you need to make sure that you are collecting all kinds of metadata when the model is being built. You need to make sure that your model validators who might not understand AI should still be able to validate AI models. You should be able to make sure that you are up to date with the latest fairness detection techniques. You have technology that can really scale to monitoring models that are processing millions of records, right? So these are tough technical problems that need to be solved. So, and I mean, thankfully, there are products that solve this. As I mentioned, there is OpenScale, there is AI governance from IBM that helps solve this. So what enterprises need to do is solve these three problems. Make sure that the people are on board, make sure that the business is on board, and make sure that they are using the right technology and the technology partner to help them on this journey. So if with that, I mean, companies who have done that, I have seen reap the true benefits of AI. And I believe that's how companies need to get onto this journey of adoption of trusted AI.
So Manish, adding to this thing, so how you at TechM are trying to provide a prescription around this thing to their clients?
Yeah, so let me answer that. While each organization is different and one prescription may not apply to other, based on my experience and working with different customers, what I have realized and understood is that organization actually need to follow a 4-step process, right? To scale and scale responsibly. First is they need to focus on standardization of their processes for model creation. For example, they should start using some standard model workbench instead individual data scientists working on models, taking months to come up with new model and going through that cycle. That is the first part, and that works as an accelerator. Second part is to achieve the real scalability. They also need to set up enterprise-wide model operations, which takes care of model packaging, repository, versioning, deployment, monitoring and alerting, right? So some of these things are required for scalability. Post that, they also need to ensure that model performance is intact throughout the life cycle, right? What it means is whatever factors impacting model performance, they need to iron them out. For example, they need to ensure that data sets are fair and unbiased during training. And even after post-production, they have to ensure that they are not getting any more bias. They also need to ensure that models are explainable, up to non-technical folks, to the business users, so that adoption doesn't get hindered. And they also need to figure out what are the different ways to monitor drift, be it data drift or model drift, and those drifts should be acted upon, right? So those aspects will ensure that model performance remains consistent and there is no doubt or concern about the model decisions. Finally, right, some of the organizations which are compliance heavy, like finance, they would probably need to set up separate processes like model risk management or review board for the overall governance. So these 3-4 steps I feel would help organizations to scale and scale responsibly.
Thanks, Manish. I think it's a great response from both of you. I think what comes out as a summary is that certainly responsible AI is the way to scale AI. It is not a hindrance to scale AI. So I think that is coming out very strongly. Other good comfort comes the technology is ready. Correct? It's a technology ready. Products are there. IBM its own OpenScale is there, which addresses this very aspect of the responsible AI. And you have prescription also, correct? So it's not something that people have to do a trial and error. There is a method to it. There is steps to it. There is a techniques to it, correct? So it's a well defined space now where the people can go about in a structured manner. So we have technology, we have process, methodology, and techniques in place, and it's essential, correct? And potentially it is helping to identify the fairness aspect rather than it's inducing, correct? So it is the ability to identify the any bias or fairness. So it's a completely reverse, correct? So typically the blame comes that it's introducing the fairness or biases, while it can it sits in another part of the spectrum. In fact, if it is there, it can identify. So I think it's a great stuff of things both of you have said, and I think it's a learning for all our people who are listening to this particular show. Thank you very much for your time. I think we are different time zone. Manish Jain, you're in US. Manish Bhide, you're in India. I think we could manage it well. And again, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Hasit, and thank you, Team Tech Mahindra, for inviting me. It was a pleasure having speaking to you, the audience, right now.
Yeah,
I think.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Over to Monica.
Thank you so much for being here and taking out time for this session. And it was really an engaging session, and it was a great learning for our audience that responsible AI is not an hindrance, but it enables scaling AI. So, thanks for that great discussion. Hoping everyone would gain a lot of learning from this. Thank you so much.